I did not beg. I simply smiled and clicked send. In less than 60 minutes, the entire family who called me a total failure would discover they had just signed their own nightmare. They took my husband, and they took my voice, but they left me with the most dangerous weapon of all. They left me the evidence. They think I am grieving, but I am actually just watching the money transfer clear. My name is Harlow Bennett. The subject line of the email blinked at me in bold red letters that spelled out final notice. Most people would have trembled. Most people would have felt the walls closing in on 34 years of a well-ordered life. I did not feel a thing. My mouse cursor hovered over the button. Attached to my draft was a compressed folder containing exactly 400 megabytes of financial ruin. I did not explain myself in the body text. I did not ask for mercy. I simply clicked send. 6 months ago, I was a different woman. Back then, I was the director of risk compliance at Redwood Harbor Analytics. My entire world was built on structure. I hunted for discrepancies in ledgers and flagged compliance failures for billion-dollar portfolios. I believed in rules. I believed that if you followed the protocol, you were safe. I applied that same logic to my personal life. I loved my husband, I honored my parents, and I adored my younger sister. I thought loyalty was a currency that never devalued. I was wrong. The bomb did not fall with a siren. It arrived with a cheerful chime from the group chat titled Bennett Family Core. I was standing in my kitchen making coffee. I picked up the phone, expecting a photo of my father's garden or a recipe from my mother. Instead, the screen filled with a high-contrast black-and-white image. It was a sonogram. The caption beneath it was typed by my sister. Brielle. It read, Big Surprise. I froze, but it was not the fetus that made my heart stop beating. I zoomed in on the bottom corner of the photo, right where the patient's skin met the edge of the frame. There was a hand resting protectively, intimately, on Brielle's exposed stomach. I knew the shape of those knuckles. I knew the silver chronograph watch on the wrist because I had spent $6,000 on it for our 5th anniversary. That was Evan. That was my husband claiming my sister's pregnancy. The air left the room. Before I could even inhale, a private message banner slid down from the top of my screen. It was from Evan. He was upstairs in our bedroom. Don't make a scene. The text read, For the baby. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was issuing a gag order. I dialed my mother, Judith. I needed her to tell me this was a sick joke. She picked up on the first ring, and I could hear my father, Rick, breathing on the extension. Mom. I choked out. Did you see what Brielle posted, Harlow? Listen to me, my mother said, her voice terrifyingly calm. Brielle is in a delicate state. She needs support right now. Support, I asked, my voice cracking. Evan is my husband. That is my husband's hand on her stomach, Harlow. You must know how to sacrifice for the family. My father interrupted, his tone heavy with disappointment. This is a new life, a Bennett life. Do not make this about your jealousy. They hung up before I could scream. A moment later, my phone buzzed again. It was a notification from the shared digital calendar. Event updated baby celebration. The location was set for my parents' house next Saturday. I watched as the guest list refreshed. My name, which had been at the top, flickered and then vanished. I had been deleted. I stood alone in the silence of a house that Evan and I had bought together. The tears I expected did not come. Instead, a cold clarity washed over me. I unlocked my phone and opened our joint bank application. I needed to see how long they had been playing me. I scrolled past the grocery bills and the utility payments until I stopped at a transaction from 48 hours ago. It was a withdrawal of $9,900. It was just shy of the $10,000 threshold that triggers a federal flag. The recipient was a company I had never heard of called Juniper Vale Events LLC. I stared at the screen. The weeping wife was gone. The director of risk compliance was back on the clock, and I had just found the first thread of a very long rope. I walked into the kitchen and found Evan leaning against the island. He was drinking a glass of water as if he had not just detonated my entire life. I slammed my phone down on the granite counter. The screen was still glowing with the image of his hand on my sister's stomach. "I am waiting for an explanation," I said. My voice was dangerously steady. Evan set the glass down. He did not flinch. He did not look guilty. He looked annoyed. "Lower your voice," he said. "Brielle needs rest. She is in a very fragile state. She is pregnant with your child. Evan, I am your wife. Do you not think I deserve Brielle needs me more than you do right now?" He interrupted, cutting through my marriage vows with a dull, rusty blade. Before I could respond, Brielle shuffled into the room. She was wearing one of my oversized cashmere cardigans, wrapping it around herself like armor. Her eyes were red and puffy. She looked small. She looked like the victim. "Harlow, please." She sobbed, her voice trembling. "I didn't want this, but I made a mistake. And now there is a baby." She looked at Evan, and he immediately moved to her side, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder, the same hand from the photo. "You slept with my husband," I stated, the reality finally solidifying in the air. My mother, Judith, stepped between us. I had not even realized she had followed me into the kitchen. She gripped my forearm, her nails digging into my skin. It was not a hold of comfort. It was restraint. "Sweetheart," she whispered, using the pet name she hadn't used in years. "Don't be selfish. The baby is innocent. You need to be the bigger person here. The bigger person." I pulled my arm away. "I am being asked to celebrate my own betrayal." "We think it is best if you stay somewhere else for a few days," my father said from the doorway. He would not look me in the eye. "Just until things settle down. We cannot have this stress around Brielle. This is my house," I said. "My name is on the deed." "And so is Evan's," my father replied. "And he is inviting Brielle to stay. You are the one causing a scene." I was forced out of my own front door with nothing but my purse and the clothes on my back. I sat in my car for 2 hours, shaking before I decided to go back in and pack a bag. I used my key on the front door. It did not turn. I tried again. It was stuck. I looked closely at the hardware. The finish was slightly different. They had changed the locks. I pulled out my phone to check the security cameras. Access denied. Password changed. Panic began to rise in my throat. I remembered my laptop, my personal MacBook that held my entire digital life, was sitting on the desk in the study. It was gone. I knew it instantly. Then came the email. It popped up on my phone with a ping that sounded like a gunshot. It was from a lawyer representing Evan. The subject line read, "Amicable separation proposal." I opened the attachment with trembling fingers. It was a draft agreement. They wanted the house. They wanted the savings. But the last page made my blood run cold. It was an addendum transferring my rights to a future asset portfolio. At the bottom was my signature. It was a perfect replica of my handwriting. I had never seen this document in my life. I dialed my parents again. My mother answered on the second ring. "Mom, they locked me out, and Evan sent legal papers with a forged signature. You have to stop this. Harlow." She sighed, sounding exhausted by my existence. "Brielle is carrying the family bloodline. That child is the future. You need to understand your place in this. If you fight this, you are fighting the family." "Dad," I asked, "are you there?" There was only silence on the line before the call disconnected. That night, I checked into a Motel 6 off the interstate. The sheets smelled like stale smoke and lemon cleaner. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my credit monitoring app. I needed to know how deep the rot went. A red alert flashed at the top of the screen. A new activity had been detected. I tapped on it. It was a hard inquiry for a massive line of credit from a bank I did not recognize. The bank was located in Montana. The inquiry was dated exactly 48 hours ago. 2 days before they told me about the baby. 2 days before they changed the locks. They had not just abandoned me. They were funding my replacement with my own credit score. I sat on the lumpy mattress of the motel room with a cheap prepaid laptop I had bought at a 24-hour superstore. The tears were gone. In their place was the cold, mechanical rhythm of my training. I was no longer a grieving wife. I was a risk compliance officer conducting an internal audit of my own life. I started with a timeline. I opened a spreadsheet and began to log every odd interaction from the last 6 months. The first red flag was exactly 60 days ago. Evan had asked for my social security number. I just need it for the new tax software. He had said while chopping vegetables, his voice casual, "I want to make sure we maximize the joint filing." I had recited the numbers to him without looking up from my book. I gave him the combination to my identity because I trusted him. Next, I logged into the bank portal again. I filtered the transaction history, looking for patterns that a standard algorithm might miss, but a human eye would catch. I found them. It was not just the large withdrawal I had seen earlier. There were dozens of smaller transfers. $2,000 here, $3,000 there. They were all erratic amounts, but they occurred with disciplined regularity. In the compliance world, we call this structuring. They were keeping the amounts low enough to avoid triggering an automatic currency transaction report, but high enough to bleed me dry. All the money flowed into one entity, Juniper Vale Events LLC. I cross-referenced the business address listed on the transaction details. It was a physical location in a wealthy suburb. I pulled up the invitation to Brielle's baby shower that my mother had posted on Facebook. The address for the party was identical to the registered address of the shell company draining my savings. My family was throwing a party to celebrate my husband's infidelity, and I was literally paying for the catering. I needed to know how they got my digital signature. I called Miles Hart. He was an old friend from college who now worked in high-level cybersecurity. I explained that my laptop was gone, but my cloud accounts were still active. "Miles, I need you to check my browser sync history," I said, cradling the phone against my ear. "Look for extensions installed in the last month." I heard the rapid clatter of his keyboard on the other end. "Harlow." "This is ugly," Miles said after a few minutes. "You have a plugin called PDF Assistant installed. It looks generic, but the permissions are wide open. It has screen reading and form autofill capabilities." And Harlow. "It was installed manually." Manually, I asked. "Someone had physical access to your machine." He confirmed. "They sat at your keyboard, installed this, and granted it permission to replicate your signature on command. Who had access to your laptop, Evan?" I whispered. I thanked Miles and hung up. The digital trail was solid, but I needed a face. I transferred the last of my liquid cash to Nina Rowe, a private investigator I had used for corporate background checks. I gave her one task: watch Juniper Vale. She sent me a file 4 hours later. It contained a series of high-resolution photographs taken with a long-range lens. The photos showed Evan standing outside a coffee shop. He was arguing with a woman in a sharp white suit. She looked expensive. She looked dangerous. I zoomed in on the woman's face. Nina had identified her in the caption as Sloan Mercer, a corporate liability attorney representing a regional bank. My stomach turned over. I knew that face. I minimized the photo and frantically scrolled through my personal cloud archive, searching for an album from 3 years ago. It was from my parents' anniversary party. I found the group shot, standing in the back row, smiling politely next to my mother and Brielle, was Sloan Mercer. Oh my God! I breathed into the empty room. I looked closer at the old photo. Sloan's hand was resting on Brielle's shoulder. They were not strangers. They were friends. This was not a crime of passion. Evan did not just stumble into an affair with my sister. This was a coordinated extraction. My husband, my sister, and this lawyer had built a pipeline to siphon my credit, my assets, and my identity, And my parents were providing the moral cover. I was not just a woman scorned. I was the mark in a long con. The glass walls of the conference room at Redwood Harbor Analytics usually made me feel powerful, but today they felt like the sides of an aquarium. I was on display. Arthur Lane, our CFO, sat across from me with a folder that looked too thin to contain my termination, yet heavy enough to crush my career. Beside him sat the Director of Human Resources, a woman who refused to make eye contact. We received an anonymous tip. "Harlow," Arthur said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the mahogany table. "It alleges that you have been leaking high-net-worth client data to a third-party real estate development firm." "That is absurd," I said, fighting to keep my voice from shaking. "I am the one who writes the protocols to prevent leaks. I would never—" "The logs do not lie," Arthur interrupted softly. "Access was granted to the secure server at 12 minutes past 2 in the morning on Tuesday. Your hard token was used for authentication." I stared at the timestamp. I had been asleep in a motel bed at that hour, heavily medicated with over-the-counter sleep aids just to stop my brain from screaming, but the digital fingerprint was mine. I managed to take a photo of the log before Arthur pulled it back. Under the table, I forwarded it to Miles. His reply came within 30 seconds, vibrating against my leg. "VPN tunnel. Exit node is in a ski town called Marrow Ridge. Isn't that where that event company hosted a VIP retreat last week?" My blood went cold. "Juniper Vale." Arthur was still talking, but he was frowning at a secondary report on his tablet. "Harlow. I am looking at vendor payments to a Juniper Vale events. They are recurring invoices for $9,900. That is exactly $100 below the threshold that requires my signature." "I didn't approve those," I said. "No," Arthur said, tapping the screen. "Paul Venn did." The room spun. Paul Venn was the operations manager. He was also my father-in-law's golf partner. I had served him drinks in my mother's living room every Thanksgiving for the past 5 years. He was not just a colleague, he was part of the network. "We have to place you on administrative leave pending a full forensic investigation." The HR director finally spoke, her voice robotic. "Please, hand over your badge and your phone." Walking out of the building was a slow death. I was escorted by security like a common thief. I stood on the sidewalk, stripped of my title, my income, and my reputation. If they pinned this data leak on me, I would never work in finance again. I would be radioactive. I returned to the motel to find a courier waiting in the lobby. He handed me a thick manila envelope. The return address was my parents' house. There was a sticky note attached to the front in my mother's elegant cursive. "Sign this so we can all have some peace. Don't make it harder than it is." I ripped it open. It was not an apology. It was a settlement agreement. It framed my exit from the marriage as a voluntary forfeiture of assets in exchange for protection from potential litigation regarding corporate negligence. They were blackmailing me. They were telling me that if I gave them the money, they would make the data leak go away. I sat on the curb outside my room, the asphalt rough against my jeans. My phone, which was now a cheap burner because the company had confiscated my main device, buzzed with a social media notification. I should not have looked, but I did. It was Brielle. She had posted a story to Instagram 5 minutes ago. The video showed her sitting on a velvet throne at her baby shower, surrounded by white balloons and expensive gifts. My mother was laughing in the background. Evan was holding a tiny pair of shoes. The caption was written in a swirling golden font. "Family is everything." I sat alone in the parking lot of a budget motel, wondering if I would have enough money to buy dinner, while the people who shared my DNA toasted to my destruction. They thought they had buried me. They forgot that I was a seed. I sat in the dim light of the motel room and treated my identity like a breached server. I contacted the 3 major credit bureaus and placed a freeze on every file bearing my name. I activated fraud alerts that would trigger a phone call if anyone so much as sneezed near my credit score. Then came the passwords. I scrubbed every login I owned, replacing them with randomized 20-character strings of alphanumeric chaos. I enabled hardware-based two-factor authentication for everything. If Evan wanted to impersonate me again, he would need to cut off my thumb. I walked into a credit union that had no branches in my hometown and opened a checking account solely in my name. I transferred the last $11,000 of my personal inheritance out of the joint savings. It was the only liquid cash Evan had not touched yet. When the confirmation receipt printed, I felt the first spark of control returning. I was no longer bleeding out. "We are not playing defense anymore. Harlow," Tessa Klein said. She was a litigation attorney who specialized in corporate fraud, and she cost $600 an hour. She was worth every cent. She filed an emergency motion for the preservation of electronic evidence. She sent a courier to Redwood Harbor Analytics with a notice that explicitly stated that any alteration, deletion, or fragmentation of server logs would be treated as spoliation of evidence. She effectively froze the crime scene. Then came the intelligence from Nina Rowe. We met in a diner 3 towns over. She slid a dossier across the table. "Juniper Vale is a funnel," Nina said, keeping her voice low. "Money goes in from your joint account, and it goes out to a construction firm in Montana. They are building a luxury lodge called Marrow Ridge. But Harlow, the project is underwater. They are defaulting on loans. They need a massive injection of capital, or the whole thing collapses in 30 days. The pieces clicked together in my mind with the precision of a locking mechanism. The baby shower, the sudden obsession with family image, the extensive guest list of wealthy friends. The baby celebration was not a party. It was a fundraising gala. Evan and Brielle were using the wholesome image of a growing family and supportive grandparents to lure investors into a failing real estate scam. They needed the picture of stability. I was the liability they had to erase. Brielle was the shiny new asset. I checked the recording statutes for the state. It was a one-party consent jurisdiction. I downloaded a high-fidelity recording app. I was done arguing. I was only interested in their confessions. I opened the family group chat, which had been silent since I was kicked out. My fingers hovered over the keys. I typed a lie that tasted like ash in my mouth. "I am sorry," I wrote. "I want peace. I will come to the party. I just want to support the family." The replies came instantly. Heart emojis from my mother, a thumbs up from my father, a text from Evan that said, "Glad you came to your senses." They thought they had broken me. They thought I was coming back to sign their settlement papers and smile for the cameras. I closed my laptop. I was not preparing a toast for the new baby. I was building a slide deck. I began to compile the screenshots, the bank transfers, the forged signatures, and the photos of Sloan Mercer. I was going to give a presentation. All right. I was not going to that lodge to win my husband back. I was going there to burn their entire system to the ground. I stepped off the plane in Montana into air that felt thin and sharp, like the edge of a blade. Marrow Ridge Lodge sat high in the mountains, a sprawling fortress of timber and glass designed to intimidate anyone whose net worth was under 8 figures. Tessa walked a half step behind me. To the world. She was my disorganized scheduling assistant, clutching a tablet and looking frazzled. In reality, her tote bag contained 3 notarized court orders and a direct line to the state prosecutor. Before we began the ascent to the lodge, we made one stop. I sat in the back booth of a roadside diner that smelled of grease and pine. Across from me sat a woman in a flannel shirt and a trucker hat. Agent Dana Reese did not look like a federal financial investigator, which was exactly why she was good at her job. I slid the dossier across the scratched table. It contained the timeline of the wire transfers and the structuring pattern Miles had uncovered. Reese flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the columns of numbers. "This is good work, Harlow. The structuring is clear. But it is circumstantial," Reese said. Closing the binder. "I need fire. I need them to explicitly state that they are leveraging your assets without your consent. I need a confession on tape that links the fraud to the intent. You will get it," I said. "Be careful," Reese warned, her voice dropping. "If they are desperate enough to fake a pregnancy timeline, They are desperate enough to hurt you. We checked into the lodge an hour later. The receptionist typed on her keyboard with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She handed me a registration card to review. I looked at the printed details and felt a shiver crawl down my spine. My home address had been changed to a post office box in a town I had never visited, but the line below it was worse. Emergency contact Evan Carver. Relationship husband. Authority full medical power of attorney. They were not just stealing my money. They were preparing a narrative where I was mentally unstable, and Evan had the legal right to commit me. Change this, I told Tessa in a whisper, handing her the card. They are setting me up for a psychiatric hold. We walked into the suite. It was lavish, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-capped peaks. I pulled out my phone to check in with Miles. The signal bars at the top of the screen went from full to 0 in an instant. I walked to the window. Still searching. I walked to the balcony. Nothing. It is a jammer, Tessa said, pulling a small frequency detector from her bag. The device was glowing red. This isn't bad reception. Harlow. Someone is actively blocking cellular signals in this wing. They want you isolated. A knock at the door made us both jump. Tessa quickly sat at the desk and pretended to type. I opened the door. Evan stood there. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and holding a bottle of expensive red wine. He looked like the man I married, warm and safe, not the monster who had signed away my life. Harlow, he said softly, stepping into the room without an invitation. I am so glad you made it. Brielle is really looking forward to seeing you. I am sure she is, I said, keeping my back straight. He placed the wine on the table and sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I know things have been tense, but we can fix this. You just need to sign the amendment to the trust. It is just a formality to secure the liquidity for the lodge. Do it for the family. Is that all it is I asked? A formality. Brielle needs me. Harlow. But I need you to be reasonable, he said, his voice dropping to that manipulative whisper he used to use when he wanted sex. Just sign the paper so we can all move on. Don't make me take harder steps. He left the papers on the table and walked out. As soon as the door clicked shut, my burner phone, which was connected to the lodge's encrypted Wi-Fi, pinged with a notification. It was a message from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a video file. I pressed play. On the screen, a digital version of me at deepfake so perfect it made me nauseous was screaming racial slurs and ranting about stealing corporate funds. It looked real. It sounded exactly like me. A text followed the video, sign the papers by dinner, or this goes to every board member in your industry. Your career will be dead by morning. I did not panic. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction settle in my chest. They had just handed me the weapon. I forwarded the video file and the threatening text to Tessa and Agent Reese. We have the fire, I said to Tessa. Now let's burn them down. 30 minutes before the doors were set to open for the reception, the air in the lodge felt heavy enough to choke on. I was fixing my lipstick in the hallway mirror when my mother grabbed my arm and pulled me into an empty linen closet. The smell of lavender detergent was overwhelming. She did not hug me. She did not ask how I was coping with the destruction of my marriage. She simply smoothed the lapel of my blazer with a terrifyingly maternal gentleness. Listen to me, Harlow, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. If you behave tonight, if you stay silent, I will let you see the baby when it is born. That is the deal. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me and realized she was negotiating visitation rights to my husband's illegitimate child as if it were a business perk. Before I could answer, the door opened. Brielle stood there, dressed in a shimmering gold gown that accentuated the baby bump. She looked angelic to an outsider, but I saw the way her eyes darted past me to the settlement agreement Evan was holding in the corridor. Harlow, Brielle said, her voice thick with fake emotion. I am just so glad you could make it. It means so much to have the whole family here. I walked past her without a word. I entered the pre-function area where the guests were gathering. My father, Rick, was standing by the bar. He looked older than I remembered. His shoulders were slumped, and he was nursing a scotch. When he saw me, he stiffened. He walked over and pressed a small velvet box into my hand. "For the occasion," he muttered, refusing to meet my eyes. I opened the box. Inside was a silver charm bracelet I had admired as a teenager. But tucked underneath the velvet cushion was a scrap of paper, folded into a tiny square. I palmed it and turned away to read it. The handwriting was jagged, as if written in a hurry. "Don't sign. They want to kill your career." My heart hammered against my ribs. My father had known. He had been silent, but he had been watching. I looked back at him, but he had already turned away to shake hands with a man who had just arrived. I froze. The man shaking my father's hand was Paul Venn. The operations manager from Redwood Harbor Analytics was here, hundreds of miles from our office, laughing with my family. He was not just a guest. He was the internal link that had approved the fraudulent invoices. The net was tighter than I thought. Tessa appeared at my elbow, holding her tablet like a shield. "I spoke to the front desk manager," she whispered, pretending to show me a schedule. "I asked for the audit log of who changed your room reservation to a medical hold status." He tried to tell me it was a system glitch, but I saw the screen, Harlow. The user who authorized the change was Smercer Admin. Sloan Mercer is running the logistics for this entire building. I felt a hand clamp down on my wrist. It was not a caress. It was a vice. I turned to see Evan. His charming mask had slipped, revealing the desperation underneath. He squeezed my wrist hard enough to bruise. "Do you think you can escape?" he hissed, his face inches from mine. "You are going to walk into that room, and you are going to sign that paper, or I swear to God." I did not pull away. I let him feel the steady pulse of my rage. "Evan," I said, my voice calm and loud enough for the nearby waiters to hear, "if you touch me one more time, this becomes a criminal matter right here in the lobby. Do you really want the investors to see you assault your wife?" He released me as if I were burning hot metal. He straightened his tie, glaring at me with pure hatred, and stormed off toward the ballroom. Suddenly, a piercing shriek cut through the tension. The fire alarm strobes began to flash, painting the walls in blinding pulses of white light. It was the drill we had paid a local teenager $50 to trigger. Now Tessa yelled over the siren, while the staff rushed to guide the confused guests toward the exits. Tessa and I moved against the flow. We slipped behind the unattended reception desk and kicked open the door to the back office. The manager's computer was unlocked. We had exactly 5 minutes to download the truth before they realized the building was not actually on fire. The silver juniper lounge was draped in soft linen and expensive floral arrangements, but the atmosphere was pure Shark Tank. Smooth jazz played over the speakers, masking the low hum of business deals being cut over glasses of vintage champagne. A projection screen behind the small stage displayed the logo of the Marrow Ridge Project intertwined with a pacifier. It was grotesque. I looked around the room. There were no cousins or aunts here. The chairs were filled with men in tailored suits and women wearing watches that cost more than my student loans. This was not a baby shower. It was a closing dinner. The master of ceremonies, a hired professional with a radio voice, tapped the microphone. And now, to assure us of the project's ironclad stability, he boomed, gesturing toward me. "Please welcome the family's very own senior risk compliance expert from Redwood Harbor Analytics, Mrs. Harlow Bennett." Polite applause rippled through the room. They were not clapping for me. They were clapping for the safety of their investment. Graham Carver, Evan's father, stepped forward with a smile that looked like it had been surgically attached. He handed me the microphone. "Harlow," he said loud enough for the front row to hear, "why don't you tell our friends about the family liquidity that secures their future?" I took the microphone. It felt heavy and cold, like a judge's gavel. I looked at Evan. who was standing by the bar, smug and confident. I looked at my parents, who were beaming at the guests. I took a deep breath. "Thank you, Graham," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a tremor. "I would love to talk about liquidity. I came here tonight to tell you exactly where your money is going, and exactly why my name is on the paperwork." I nodded to Tessa, who was standing near the AV booth. She hit the enter key. The logo of the baby and the mountain vanished. In its place, a high-contrast document appeared on the massive screen. It was the asset addendum. A red laser pointer, digital and sharp, circled the signature at the bottom. "This is a document transferring my personal assets to the Juniper Vale entity," I said, walking to the edge of the stage. The signature is dated October 4th. On October 4th, I was in a hospital emergency room for a migraine, 3 states away. "This is a forgery." A murmur went through the crowd. Tessa hit the key again. The screen filled with rows of bank transactions. "These are 42 separate withdrawals." I continued, pointing at the screen. "Each one is for exactly $9,900. That is $100 below the federal reporting limit. In my industry, we call this structuring. It is a felony designed to hide money laundering." Sloan Mercer bolted from her seat in the front row. Her face was flushed with panic. "Cut the feed," she screamed at the AV technician. "These are privileged legal documents. This is illegal." "What is illegal?" "Sloan," I said into the microphone, my voice overriding hers, "is fabricating a consent form and using a stolen identity to secure a construction loan." Brielle stood up, clutching her stomach with both hands. Tears began to stream down her face instantly. "How could you?" she wailed, turning to the investors. "She is just jealous. She is attacking a pregnant woman." "My baby!" "Stop it," I said. I did not yell. I did not scream. I just cut the air with 2 words. "The baby is not a shield in this room. Brielle, whatever the adults signed, the adults will answer for." "Sit down." The room was deadly silent. The jazz had stopped. The investors were staring at Graham and Evan with dawning horror. "You think this is over?" Evan shouted, stepping forward, his face twisting. "She is mentally unstable. We have the medical filings. Let's see about that," I said. "Tessa, play the audio." Tessa pressed the space bar. The speakers, which had been playing smooth jazz just moments ago, now blasted the clear, undeniable voice of my husband. It was from a recording I had captured during our confrontation in the suite. "I just need her to sign. It is just a formality to secure the liquidity. We get the money, the project clears, and then we change the air. She is just the signature." The audio hung in the air. I looked at Evan. He was not smug anymore. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing in the center of a burning building. And I was the one holding the matches. The room erupted into shouting, but the chaos was choreographed. A man in a cheap suit pushed through the confused investors and shoved a stack of papers into my chest. "Mrs. Bennett," he announced loudly, "you are hereby served with an emergency application for conservatorship based on acute financial paranoia." Graham Carver leaned in close to my ear. His breath smelled of expensive scotch and rot. "You think you won?" he hissed. "You will be locked out of every account before you can say another word. You are sick, Harlow. The courts will see that. It was a good move. If they could paint me as insane, the evidence became the ramblings of a madwoman, but we had accounted for their greed." Tessa stepped forward, not as an assistant, but as the sharpest litigator in the state. She slapped a folder onto the table in front of Graham. "That is a nice try." "Graham," Tessa said, "but this is a federal freezing order issued 30 minutes ago by a district judge. Every asset, credit line, and escrow account attached to Juniper Vale or the Carver Family Trust is currently frozen. You cannot pay your lawyers. You cannot even buy a pack of gum." The color drained from Graham's face. Before he could scream, The waiters who had been pouring champagne moved to the exits. They dropped the silver trays and pulled out badges. "Federal agents," a voice boomed. Agent Dana Reese stepped out from behind the bar, stripping off her apron to reveal the badge on her belt. "Nobody leaves," Reese commanded. "We are executing a warrant for multi-state wire fraud and identity theft." The room froze. Then my father moved. Rick walked to the center of the room, past my weeping mother, and threw a weathered, yellowing file onto the table next to the federal warrant. "It wasn't an accident," my father said, his voice shaking. "Rick, don't!" my mother pleaded, reaching for him. "Shut up." "Judith," he snapped. He looked at me, his eyes full of tears. "Harlow, look at the file. 14 years ago, the cabin fire that killed your Uncle Ben." I looked at the report. My uncle had been accused of arson and insurance fraud before taking his own life, but the name of the insurance adjuster who denied the claim and sealed his fate was right there on the bottom line, Graham Carver. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I looked at Evan. I looked at Graham. This was not just a bad marriage. I was a trophy. I was the daughter of the family they had destroyed, and they had come back to finish the job by marrying me, stealing my credit, and erasing my legacy. I was chosen because I was the girl who believed in family above all else. They weaponized my own loyalty against me. Brielle saw the walls coming down. She looked from the agents to our mother, panic rising in her chest. I didn't know about the uncle," Brielle screamed, pointing a trembling finger at our mother. "I just did what Mom said. She said Harlow would be fine if she just stayed quiet. She said we needed the money." My mother closed her eyes. Brielle had just implicated herself and our mother as active co-conspirators. The victim mask shattered on the floor. Evan dropped to his knees. He crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my skirt. "Harlow, please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "It was my idea. Blame me. Tell them it was all me. I will take the fall." I looked down at him. I felt nothing. No love. No hate. Just the cold distance of a stranger. "Get up," I said. "You are not the sacrifice. Evan, you are the choice, and you chose wrong." The chaos in the Silver Juniper Lounge was not a riot. It was a controlled demolition, while the federal agents secured the exits. I turned to the terrified catering staff who were huddled near the kitchen doors. I pulled out my phone and opened my verified banking app. "I am authorizing the immediate payment for the catering staff and the event crew from my personal legal escrow account," I announced, my voice cutting through the noise. "These people worked tonight. They will get paid. But the venue rental, the vintage champagne, the 5-figure floral arrangements, those bills belong to the Juniper Vale entity. And since I just revoked the authorization token on the main application, the Carver family and their investors are now personally liable for every single cent." Sloane Mercer tried to slide her phone into her purse, but Agent Reese was faster. She snatched the device from the lawyer's hand. "We have the deepfake source file," Reese said, holding the phone up like a trophy. "That upgrades this from fraud to federal extortion. You are not going home tonight." "Counselor." Across the room. Paul Venn tried to blend into the crowd of stunned investors, but his own company phone betrayed him. It began to flash red as the Redwood Harbor Analytics internal security system remotely locked him out. 2 officers grabbed him by the arms. The man who had approved the fake invoices to steal my life was dragged out in front of the very people he tried to impress. My mother, Judith, was sitting on a chair, shaking. An officer placed a clipboard in front of her. She was not being arrested yet, but she was being forced to sign a witness statement admitting to her role in concealing the fraud. She looked at me, pleading with her eyes. I looked past her to my father. Rick Bennett stood tall for the first time in years. He looked at the wreckage of his family, then at me. "I was wrong to be silent," he said, his voice cracking with shame. "I let them sell you to save themselves." "I am so sorry." Harlow. I nodded once. It was not forgiveness, but it was an acknowledgement. Then came the final blow. Tessa picked up the medical file that had been seized from Brielle's bag. She flipped to the second page and frowned. She handed it to Evan, who was still on his knees. Evan, Tessa said, look at the blood type compatibility report. Look at the conception date. Evan squinted at the paper. His face went pale. He looked up at Brielle. It isn't mine, he whispered. Brielle stopped crying instantly. Her face hardened. I needed a reason. Evan, she spat out. I was drowning in debt. Mom said if I was pregnant with your baby, we could force Harlow to pay for everything. I needed a hook. You were just available. The room gasped. Evan Carver had destroyed his marriage and committed a felony for a child that did not even belong to him. He was not the mastermind. He was just another tool Brielle had used. I walked over to them. I did not scream. That baby has the right to grow up far away from the lies of adults, I said quietly. Do not use that child as a shield ever again. Agent Reese gave the signal. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed off the high ceilings. Evan, Brielle, Sloane, and Paul were led away in a line. Behind them, the projection screen still displayed the frozen image of the night's theme family celebration. It was the perfect epitaph. I pulled out my phone and sent one final email to the board of directors at Redwood Harbor Analytics. It contained the police report number and the forensic audit clearing my name. My reputation was restored. I walked out of the lodge and into the freezing Montana night. The snow was falling softly. My phone buzzed with a notification. I looked down. Whistleblower reward approved. Settlement funds deposited. Assets restored. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself. I had no husband. I had no sister. I had no parents I could trust. But as I walked toward the waiting taxi, I took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. I was rich. I was free. And for the first time in my life, I belonged entirely to myself. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment down below to share your thoughts and connect with others. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.